It's podcast day. It's podcast day. Welcome in, friends. Welcome one and all. My name is Marcelin, and you are welcome here to this craft room area. We are going to talk about some making, and I'm happy you're here. It has been a little while since I've done a podcast to just share what I'm working on. I hope that some of you were able to enjoy my virtual visit episodes. I went to a fiber festival / guild conference, and I recorded a couple episodes about that. So if you haven't seen those yet, feel free to go back and have a look. But we're here now, and I was really pushing myself not to overthink turning on the camera. I do that sometimes. I just wanted to pop back in here and connect with you. I love our conversations here, and I thought I'll share what I'm working on because it's been giving me a lot of good, peaceful downtime lately. Well, see, I was about to tell a fib. Some of it has been giving me peaceful downtime. Some of it has been giving me complete agita and anxious feelings. I'll share the peaceful stuff with you first. I was gifted some Shetland fleece from Kat. Kat has a wonderful podcast out here. Kat is librophiliac on most of the social medias, and I will link Kat's YouTube channel in the description box below. I believe Kat received quite a bit of this Shetland fleece along with some other lovely wool, and she and I did kind of a swap. And I was really grateful to get some more unprocessed fiber. If you've been here for a while, it will be shocking to you that I just said that. I wasn't always into the hand processing portion of fiber making, but after attending a retreat earlier this spring with Deb Robson and getting more comfortable with my hand carders, I've really started to enjoy the very slow process of going from locks on the sheep to yarn on my wheel or on my spindle, and this is no different. I actually have the fiber in different stages, so I'm going to share that with you. Kat sent me a good amount to play with, and I'm really grateful for that because as I have been working through it, I realize that there are different things that I can do to achieve the result I want, which is essentially fiber that's fairly easy to spin. I'm going to try spinning some of it on my wheel and possibly on a drop spindle. This is how it originally came, so it's in this bag. She was able to squish a lot into this bag, and the raw locks full of all the yummy sheepy smells and lanolin are in a state where they still need to be washed and have some of the vegetable matter removed. So this is kind of the raw lock state. See, it's all sort of still stuck together the way it was on the sheep. And this has to be cleaned so that I can work with it and spin it. So you'll see that there's some lighter portions here, which are the tips of the locks. The darker fiber underneath has different colors. There's light gray, some really dark gray, almost like more like a dark chocolate brown. She sent me a really sweet note and a beautiful painting, which I tucked away into my little memory keeping scrapbook. I washed the fiber using some unicorn power scour. That's something I had not tried before I went to the fiber retreat, and I find that it works really well. I did a long hot soak for the fiber, and then kind of warm to hot soak, and then I washed it with the power scour, and then a rinse. After that washing process, the fiber opened up quite a bit. So it washes out the lanolin and the dirt and some of the, I'm guessing, hay and grass and other things got washed out. And it's Not so sticky without the lanolin. It's quite soft already after washing. Feels so good. And you can still see some of the tips. You can still see some of the tips of the fiber, which is kind of important for how I'm organizing this in order to hand card it and prepare it for spinning. So I've been identifying the locks by taking it from the tips and kind of pulling out sections. So let's see if I can show you just a lock. Kat did say that this was the shepherd's first time shearing, so there were a lot of what are called second cuts and short pieces, imperfect imperfect sections of fiber. So I'm just pulling out some locks here to show you. These are quite short. So here's a lock of fiber from the tip, the part that stands up off the sheep, to what's called the butt end, which is where the shears or scissors or clips would have taken it off the animal. It's a slow process. After the locks have been washed, what I'm doing now is I am carding them on my hand carders. If you're new here and you haven't seen some of these fiber processing tools before, this is a hand card made of wood with a sheet of metal teeth on it. They're fairly sharp, and I use these to open up the fiber even more and get it into what's called a woolen prep, so a nice open, airy preparation for fiber that's spinnable. So what I'm doing now is the clean locks I'm flicking them open. On the hand cards, I can use the teeth to open up these ends. So you see the ends of the fiber are still kind of stuck together. There's a really good amount of crimp. Crimp is like the waviness in the lock. There's still a good amount of that left. So I sit this on my lap and I just flick the ends of the fiber against the hand card. Kind of turning it over, and it opens it up quite a bit. This is a much easier way this makes it much easier to spin the fiber. And I do that on both ends, both the tip and the butt end, to open it up. And I haven't done the whole thing perfectly here, but you can see it's already much more airy and open, which means when I go to draft it for spinning, it should be pretty pleasant. So I've done a nice little bundle already. So floofy. Once they're opened up on the hand carder, then I would put them in sections back on the hand carder and make what are called rolags. So I may share that part of the process with you too. We'll see. But I can't stop touching them. They're so soft and very elastic and bouncy. And opening them up adds so much air, and that's going to translate into a nice airy yarn, especially if I do what I plan, which is to spin it woolen and leave some of that air in there. Thank you, Kat. Thank you. So that's one of the things I'm working on, to take that from fiber to yarn. There's a good amount of waste. I said earlier that there are some second cuts. So I've heard this referred to as card candy. This is what comes off of the hand carders after I flick open the locks. And these are like the short fibers that would be very difficult to spin the way I want to. You could absolutely spin a very nubbly, neppy yarn with this if you wanted to, but I think I'm actually going to felt this because I think it will make some very good textured, sort of like felted rope to add into another project I've been working on. That's my segue to share that with you now. I have been weaving. I took a freeform tapestry weaving class, the mini version, because I had to dip in and out, but it was a class. It was a class with Choi, my dearest Anne, who is an excellent weaver, and she taught a class at the festival I attended, and she taught us techniques for freeform tapestry weaving. First time I had ever tried it. I've had this school loom here forever, hanging out in the corner of my craft room unopened, and by taking the class I was finally inspired to crack it open, warp it up, and start weaving. And the techniques I learned, even in the short amount of time I was with Anne, really, really inspired me to give this a go. And I have to tell you, this has been another one of the slow and peaceful makes. It's still a work in progress because I'd like to add some fringe and tassels down here, and then I want to find a nice piece of wood to use as a bar across the top to hang this and then put it on my wall. But every stage I have just been discovering that playful feeling of purposeful imperfection, just trying something out. The combination of plain weave for different colors and different textures, using yarn, using unspun fiber. I'm loving it. So I tried a few things. Here's just some fiber that I wove in and out through the different warp strands. I tried a crochet chain. My lovely friend Paige was in the class with me, and she stepped me through how to do kind of a crochet chain going across here. This gray section at the bottom is actually my first go at spinning up a sample of the Shetland fiber I just showed you. And I carded it without caring too much about the neps and the nubbly bits in it. And then I spun it up, and I love that it came out really textured. Probably, maybe not something I might want to knit with because it was really thick and thin. And I intentionally didn't work too hard on making a perfect yarn, but I really like the way it turned out as yarn for weaving. And I think that's going to be a theme, using hand spun for weaving. Up here at the top, this gray section has a few things I'm also feeling quite proud of. This is Herdwick, which is a fiber I had not used before. I spun it up and thought, oh, this is really hairy. I'm not sure this is something I would want next to my skin. I can weave with it. I enjoyed the process of spinning it up in the sense that it was so different. It was new. I liked the novelty, but the feel of it was really not for me. And I love a woolly wool. Okay, don't get me wrong. I don't shy away from the heavily textured rustic fibers, but this was a bit over the line for me in terms of the prickly factor. And while I was spinning it, I kept thinking, would I really wear this next to my skin? But it wove up so beautifully because it's heathered, and that hair and that halo looks really good coming off of the weaving. I did some crochet chains, which I then looped around the warp Yeah, so and this is yarn that I naturally dye. These colors in between is some yarn that I was gifted many years ago, and I've had it sitting in a basket for a while, just different combinations of plant dyes. I love the way it looks in here. So much opportunity to use small samples, to use scraps, to use leftovers. I even did what I described earlier, which is I felted some of the Shetland carding waste into sort of a tube, like a dense felted tube, and then wove it in here. Just working on it for a few minutes at a time, which is how I was taught from the beginning, is kind of just approach it in small sections, has been joyous, joyful, joy making. Yeah, so I highly recommend it. This is it's called a shocked school loom, so it can stand up on a table. And I've kind of moved it around the house with me. Sometimes I sit it on a table just so that I'm walking by it, and take a little piece of, an arm's length of fiber. I'm using this large tapestry needle. For the most part, I use this tapestry needle to weave over under on the warp. Yeah, so many possibilities. Highly recommend. 10 out of 10. Anne's class was fabulous. If you ever get a chance to take a class with Anne Choi, you should do it. Peaceful whips. The reason that peaceful whips are so important to me right now is that a lot of change is happening at my job. I work for a large software company, and just lots of things have been happening that have created a bit of unsteadiness. It's a transition time. It's a time where, although I feel very grateful that my own position at my company is good and stable for now, it's not the case throughout the organization. And maybe you've been through something like that before, where if there's unsteadiness in your workday, there's not a lot of room for unsteadiness at home. So, and in this case, when I say at home, I'm specifically talking about my making. I feel very lucky that my actual home life is fairly peaceful. Life, adulting, all the things that come with that, of course. But my making really needs to be a balance, and either be playful, like the weaving, very soothing, like hand preparing fiber, or even purposely slow. I'm doing some hand stitching on a top. And I decided that maybe it would be good for me to take on another long-term project. If you've been here before, you've heard me say, normalize long-term making. And the project that I decided I would tackle is one that has given me quite a bit of nerves and anxiety before. I have created quite a few quilt tops. So if you are familiar with quilting, the top is the portion with usually all the pretty patterning that you put on top of some batting and a backing. That's a typical quilt sandwich, it's called, those three sections. And I've made quite a few quilt tops. For one, I love patchwork sewing. So I just love getting a bunch of mishmash fabrics and stitching them up together to make different new fabric by patching them together. And I did that for a long time without any consideration of how I was going to complete the actual quilt process, where you put everything together. I thought it was time for me to tackle that. And I had one quilt top that was just 4 pieces. So it was 4 indigo dyed pieces of cotton that were made by my friend Maria, and a couple of them she gifted to me, and a couple of them I purchased from her shop. I just pieced the 4 of them together, and at some point I'll show you the whole thing, but I decided it was time to create a quilt sandwich and get this project further down the way. It's pretty large. I haven't measured it, but let's just say it's larger than a lap blanket. And manipulating it under the sewing machine already was a challenge. So I feel like it's hard to tell this long story short, but the point is, I was at the point where I needed to join the 3 parts of the quilt together, and I wanted to start basting down the top to kind of keep everything steady. And that required laying it out on the floor, crawling around on my hands and knees, kind of lining everything up. Even ironing it was a huge task. And I just felt myself like my chest was tight. I was breathing heavy. I just felt myself being so stressed by this whole process. I think part of it was physically maneuvering such a large project, and part of it is that I'm not yet a confident sewer, especially on the machine. I know that the machine can be fast and can, do great things, even with just plain straight stitching. But I tend to approach it with a good amount of anxiety of getting it wrong. Like most things that get me worked up, I'm worried I'm going to get it wrong. I'm worried that I'm going to make a mistake that can't be reversed, especially when it comes to fabric and thread. I don't like the idea of waste. It's a whole thing happening in my head when it comes to sewing. Over the course of a few different sessions and just really having to talk myself down, I was able to get to the point of piecing together the backing, because I'm using, I didn't go into this with like a kit or anything. I'm using fabric from my stash. I'm using some old cotton fabric that was at one point curtains in my kids' rooms as the backing. And I'm using the top that I created and some batting that's actually also being pieced together. I just, I have pieces of things because I buy from reuse shops and so on. So I was able to get to the point where I put the sandwich together, I ironed everything, and I basted around the edge. So the 3 pieces of the quilt sandwich are together. I'm going to show it to you. For ease, I'm not going to lay this all out. I'm sure at some point when this quilt is done, I will want to tell everybody and their mom about it. So you will definitely see the whole thing at some point. But you kind of get the idea. It's these beautiful indigo dyed cotton fabrics. There are 4 of them, different kinds of print. And as I said, I finally hand basted the 4 edges together, the top, the batting, the backing. Now that the whole panic situation is over, I can kind of chuckle at myself at how worked up I got in this process. To give you a sense of the size of this, I am 5.5 feet tall, and when I hold it up off the floor, it goes over my head. So I think the finished quilt will be actually, it comes off the ground, so the finished quilt will probably be somewhere in the realm of 5 by 5 foot. Who knows? I am not trying to be specific about the dimensions. I was working with what I had in terms of these 4 cotton towels. I think they were meant to be sort of like dish towels. I don't know what their original purpose was, but I just loved the indigo dyeing that Maria did. And I love the feel of this particular cotton because it's a tiny bit textured, which is really nice. So my binding, nope, that's not true. Poof, rookie. My batting is also kind of scrappy and patchworky. So I have batting that I purchased from a reuse store, and it's in strips in some cases that are not perfect, and so I stitched some of those strips together on the machine so that I could have a bit more coming out from the edge. I won't need this much batting in the final binding, but I just wanted to have room to play. And then this is the cotton, what used to be curtains, and that itself, the back itself, is also piece together two pieces that I seamed down the middle so that I could have one big piece. Multi-step process, and it's heavy enough. I think it's something that might be good for our Florida cooler months. It's a thin batting though, so it's not going to be too hot. So now I hand basted all the way around. You can see the orange thread. I want to hand quilt this. A moment of silence for the future me who will question my decision making about hand quilting this very large for me project. But because it's kind of all together now and holding, I did a bit of basting stitches throughout to hold it all together. It just feels like a more approachable project. So I imagine myself doing some chalk lines to give myself some guidance, and then some big quilting stitches. I might do something really simple like rows, kind of a grid. I've also thought about doing some spirals or some circles that just kind of grow. I don't know yet. This is a big one for me because it just combines a lot of things that I'm not instinctively good at in the terms, like in the sense that I know the process of getting everything put together, but I have a small, very basic sewing machine. I have not done a lot of precise sewing, so like squaring things up, lining it all up. The size of it, hefting it around, has been kind of intimidating. So for me, it's big to get to the point where I feel like I can start quilting on this now and just do the slow stitching part. Thank you. I can feel you guys sending me good vibes and encouragement, and I appreciate that about each of you who comes by here to see what I'm up to. Yeah, this will be great when it's done. Cheers, friends. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me. I hope whenever you caught this podcast that it gave you a bit of you time in your day to just come hang out with your friend Marceline. And I always appreciate conversation with you, so feel free to leave me a comment below about what you're working on. Do you have some peaceful projects? Do you have some projects in timeout because they made you a bit anxious? Whatever it is, I always love to hear about it. I'm going to finish my coffee and go immediately to the editing computer and see if I can put this up for you all to come hang out. Thanks again. I love having you here, and I will see you again next time. Bye for now. Mwah.